Vielen Dank für die Einladung.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Wie smart können wir sein?
How smart can we be?
Es leben bereits mehr als 50%
More than 50% of the world population live in urban areas. And in the near future, it'll be 75%.
Ich möchte hier eine Stadt New Sonto erwähnen.
I'd like to mention New Sonto, a city that is being built in South Korea on a 6 square kilometers island in the Yellow Sea. Plans are to have 75,000 citizens. It's become known not for its architecture, but because of the commitment of Cisco, the fifth largest communication technology group in the world. Cisco installed its headquarters, the nervous system of the city. And the CEO of Cisco, John D. Chambers, who is leaving office, in an interview with Neue Zürcher Zeitung, recently said, "Nobody doubts that the internet has changed all our lives. When we consider digitization as the next generation of the internet, a digital world where everything is connected and interconnected, every country, every city, every company, irrespective of its size, will undergo changes. We stand at a turning point from the physical to a virtual world. My task," he says, "is to make sure that Cisco leads this digitization. The market will explode in a few years. 500 billion functions will be linked with the internet. Just imagine." And you need to think about what this means. Companies like Cisco and others, IBM included, say they have no idea about urban planning. They're still doing it, and they have an influence on these areas which cannot be underestimated. The growth of population in cities is not a new phenomenon. Think about Vienna between 1800 and 1900. From the Biedermeier to the end of the Gründerzeit. And then again, immediately after the First World War. The population grew from 100,000 to about 1 million within 100 years. A gigantic growth at that time. Apartments had 10 people or more, and beds were shared by 2 shifts. We had people who would use the bed during the day because we worked by night, and the other used it during the night. And this is comparable to some situations that we face today. Of course, there were many social issues connected with it, political struggles up until 1934 in Austria, which ultimately led to the takeover by the National Socialists and all the consequences. And also there was the classical conflict, big city versus small towns. The Nazis produced big city phenomena like intransparencies, lack of hygiene, uncontrollability, and ultimately communism. The big city is a synonym for communism. Small towns are transparent and functioning. So, very early, actually, we find that it was felt that the big city was sort of lost. One should focus on small towns. And the whole thing was getting ideologized. Today, we have a different problem. Companies like Cisco, IBM, or Siemens are the nervous centers, the centers for the nervous system of cities. And through these nervous systems, of course, they create dependence. In the next 100 years, the world population is going to increase to 9 billion. 3/4 will live in cities. And it's only then that the growth rate will decrease again, will drop. This process started with the industrialization in the 19th century. Urban structures show that different developments are conceivable. Shortage of resources, transportation, etc., would actually prefer small towns with short distances. When it comes to renewable energy, however, decentralization may be preferable. Solar energy, autarky, self-sufficiency. It's very difficult to state clear-cut preferences for a future smart city model or to decide and opt for one preferable model. I couldn't do so. So the question is, what is the link? What is intelligent and smart when it comes to building? A new concept was found, smart, which makes us reconsider our processes, revise them perhaps, and a concept which is fairly vague, thus allowing for a number of different strategies. It's quite interesting to find that there are sort of vague concepts and terms which are interpreted differently by different people. Still, the term, the concept is being used. We will have to consider some of the possible or potential applications of this concept. The basis or concept for all planning is predictability. Computers can cope with vast data volumes, so we can interpret the data. When it comes to the digital revolution, we find that its algorithms usually make us expect what we are used to. The assumption always is that there will be a perpetuation of what we are used to. This remains the basic or fundamental pattern. Of course, this is interesting for industry. There, standardized, calculable solutions are necessary in order to control long-term manufacturing and distribution processes. Those behind digital future, of course, also tend to focus on the attitude of people to accept what is comfortable and convenient. The fact that people do not want to give up what they have achieved. So everything that has helped improve convenience and comfort cannot easily be done away with. This is the guiding principle. In one of the recent issues of Der Spiegel, there was an article on the smartest house in Germany, in Baderdorf, a terrible building, but it's a technological model. When you want to sort of go to sleep and you press a button and the lights in the bathroom and in the living room will go off automatically. Great. And lights downstairs will go out when nobody is there. The alarm system will be turned on automatically, and you will get lights on in the bedroom. But is this what we really need? What do we do with the time that we have gained by no longer having to switch lights off and on? Of course, you get used to these conveniences and you think you can no longer live without them. For me, it would be terrible. I tend to get up during the night. I would be walking from room to room where the lights go on and off. So the digital control of all these processes, including autonomous cars, actually lead to a new kind of dependency and alienation of the individual in one's everyday life, where we will actually find that they produce deficits that we have to make up for by a dynamic sort of attention. That, well, if all this is taken away from us, what remains? Buildings should not only be comfortable, but for economic reasons, they should have a long life. Therefore, we need to consider conventional building materials and their life cycle or duration. So these are considerations that we need to make. We need to consider the various building materials which tend to show different life cycles, and they should be renewable independently of each other. Of course, this means that individual parts of the building should be replaceable without having to renovate the entire building. Some parts of the building can no longer be used. Does this mean that I have to tear down the whole building? Or can't I just refurbish the facade, perhaps? So all these are questions which play a role. Buildings require our dynamic attention, a permanent process. So it's not just a matter of thermal insulation, perhaps. We are all familiar with thermal insulation that lasts, well, no more than 20 years. Rather, we should also consider the use of renewable energy, which is a drastic change. Geothermal energy, for instance, which can be used and requires no additional insulation, for instance. So these are the kinds of solutions that we should bear in mind. Otherwise, we would not be able to protect monuments, because you would need thermal insulation for all of them. I mean, this kills many of the small old buildings. Now, we could show that very often it's not necessary to have thermal insulation for buildings on all sides. So, there are building materials that require replacement at different times, and they should be renewable, and they should be exchangeable or replaceable. So, what we need is a permanent process of monitoring, trying to find solutions which cannot simply be defined by thermal insulation. Now, there's one point that is quite interesting, is the aesthetic or artistic perspective, which we should not neglect. It's not only technological aspects that should be in the foreground. When you build a smart building, a smart city, it may end up as terrible architecture. So this is also a cultural issue. So the question is, what will future cities look like when there are more robots than people working in the factories, when everything is linked, when you have autonomous cars? Smart is a concept that is overriding in all areas. It's become something like a magic formula. Smartness stands for smart economy, smart people, smart governance, smart mobility, smart environment, and smart living. Smart cities, to take a positive perspective, should be an Internet of things and services. The prominent qualities or advantages will only actually be felt through a permanent communication process between all stakeholders. One of the prerequisites, of course, is the urban environment, including technological equipment, sensors, for instance, collection of data, so that there's permanent interaction among citizens and that there are possibilities of controlling or monitoring the system. So the fundamental question is, what is the purpose of these monitoring or control systems? Citizens become part of the technological infrastructure. Give me 2 more minutes. The question is, what is the purpose? Usually, it means an increase of economic capacity as a result of the linking on a local and super-regional level. I have to be brief, so let me just say information per se is stupid. Information has to become knowledge. And this should lead to sensible implementation strategies. Now, this requires a universal code of behavior. So let me come to my conclusions.
Und zwar zum Thema des Städtebaus, der ja immer noch eine
urban planning.
Frage ist, die
This
Kultur zu beantworten.
is still a cultural issue. Today, we find urban planning wavering back and forth between two attitudes: a centralist, authoritarian approach versus, or with mega projects, versus being an organism trying to find its own way, a city without any highlights, which leads to the resignation of architects. Both attitudes are non-productive. Classical urban planning can make for certain highlights in a city, but it functions only in terms of mega projects. It doesn't respond to changes. A city without any special qualities is a capitulation, meaning you cannot influence the development of a city. Both approaches or attitudes actually are present today. This also means that design becomes meaningless. It seems that design has no impact on the result, which is chaos. But basically, even slums are well regulated and organized. That's an interesting aspect. However, some important elements are missing. Everything has been built according to certain rules, political decisions, zoning regulations, etc. Feasibility studies and financing or funding plans have been considered, but the result doesn't make sense. Every individual lot is linked to the road network, which connects them to the world. This even applies to illegal settlements, where you also find a certain form of regulation. So urbanism is a field of forces where different interests are at work. It's not a question of control or laissez-faire to take the two extremes. Rather, there should be a balance between them. Urban planning could be a balancing of different factors. A good urban planning should produce a certain measure of stability, which should allow for future changes, while at the same time not actually disturbing the original ideas. So you need to have robust designs and plans. You may have integrated smart elements in urban planning, but what you need is a system that responds to a complex and changing requirement profile. The participatory approach needs political support. So what you need is a specific strategy that allows for diversified potential developments. As an urban planner, you need to allow for future developments without disturbing or destroying the whole. The subjective vision still remains an important element. So I plead for subjectivity in this context. Subjectivity very often gets lost. Architects and urban planners and garden architects have always had visions for the future, and they manage to visualize them. So designing and planning are a wonderful instrumentarium to raise controversial issues. So what you need actually is to achieve a certain balance. Of course, experience plays an important role. Experience gained as the result of experiencing different sociological backgrounds. You have to take a sort of overall view. This must be the basis for any type of urban planning. Thank you very much.